of the writing I've done. I think that I hope you find this a very interesting and useful session. So, just a little bit of background to put things in context. So, I originally trained as a clinical psychologist and I worked in the prison setting, mostly doing therapy with prisoners and people on probation. And I did that for some years. And then I was approached by a professor from my local university who said he was organizing an expedition to Antarctica. And he was looking for a field psychologist. And was I interested in going to Antarctica to collect data on an expedition that was crossing for 70 days up into the high plateau area of Antarctica. And it took me about 2 minutes to say, yes, I'd be absolutely delighted. And so that was really the topic of my PhD. So it's really an organizational psychology PhD. So it's basically in the area of work stress in extreme environments. And after that, I ran my own clinical psychology practice for some time as a therapist, and then moved into organizational work, originally with a smaller accounting firm, and then they merged with Deloitte. So I worked with them and then became a partner in the firm and did that for a number of years in Wellington, New Zealand. Then I got a bit restless and I decided to do something rash and I moved to Hong Kong. And I was 8 years in Hong Kong. I had a great time during the handover of Hong Kong to China. And during that time, I met a really nice guy who was the HR manager for Hong Kong Bank. And we built a business together. And after 3 years, we managed to sell it. It's the sort of thing you could only really do in Hong Kong in those kind of days. They were heady days. And then I came back to New Zealand at the end of 2000, and started the Executive Coaching Centre, doing management consulting and doing individual coaching. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I started to get a bit of arthritis and things, and I found that running workshops where I was standing on my feet all day was quite a trial, and decided at that stage to find a business partner who has now taken all of that work. So I now just do one-on-one coaching basically and write books. And as you've heard, this is from a book that came out earlier this year, Coaching Expertise, 6 Essential Steps for Every Effective Coach. And I'm just going to put on I'm going to share my screen and we can begin by looking at some of these slides. So the point I want to start with is really in many ways quite a controversial area. There is some really interesting research, and I just want to quote two studies. There's lots of other studies, but I just want to quote two, which are quite illustrative of a very interesting phenomena. So the first paper is called All Downhill from the PhD, which is a delightfully provocative title. And what it shows is that for people who do PhDs, their initial publications, the citation rate, so that's really about how many times their work is referenced by other researchers, decreases with time. And that their initial papers tend to have above average impact in terms of readers and people citing their work and so on, and that decreases over time. So it's a very curious kind of finding, and you might kind of shake your head a little bit about it, but there's more. A very interesting longitudinal study, and this is a big study, 170 therapists and 6,500 clients, found that therapeutic effectiveness for therapists decreases over time. So as you get more experienced, these studies suggest you get worse. So just such an interesting kind of a couple of pieces of research, and there's research in other areas, but I just want to clarify this because initially it seems like it's quite counterintuitive. I mean, we all love professional development. That's why we're here this afternoon. We all often feel engaged and interested, enthused, and we try things out and so on. So how could it possibly be that, at least for, in this case, researchers and therapists, probably for coaches as well, we actually get worse over time? So when you really look at the research and you look at a whole lot of other variables, what happens is that people feel they get better over time. So their sense of self-confidence rises. They learn a lot over time. So in other words, their knowledge increases. Their breadth of skills often increases. So it's not that professional development does nothing, but when you look at where the rubber meets the road, the most important things, that is, does it have an impact on clients? The answer appears to be no. Now, this isn't done for coaches, so I'm speculating here, and I'm on relatively thin ice in speculating because there hasn't been work done, but still, very interesting work that would suggest that the same is true for coaches. And of course, the other thing that we need to understand from all of this work is that, of course, these are only averages, and we all know the tyranny of the average. What it might be is that some people get complacent and become much worse, where other people steadily improve, but of course, the average doesn't show that. So a very interesting area of research that really got me thinking about the impact of professional development. So what I want you to do is to just have a bit of a think, and I'd like us to have a bit of a discussion. So it's quite useful just to pause at this point and just have a few questions, have a bit of discussion, because in some ways this is kind of quite counterintuitive. So it's useful just to discuss it. And just while you're thinking about things, what I'd like you to do is just to think about, just roughly guess how many professional development hours that you spent in the last 12 months. So, you know, do you go to something about once a month and you spend a couple of hours plus a couple of hours reading or whatever it is? Just get a rough kind of idea in your mind. And then what I'd like you to do is to think about what percentage of what you've learned in professional development you have fully implemented. In other words, much of the professional development you go to is really interesting, and I'm sure you're engrossed by it and fascinated by it. I'm sure you've tried some things out, but how much have you actually implemented? So questions, and let's just discuss those couple of points. And I'm very interested to hear some views. And then we'll talk about what you can do about this issue. But let's just start with this point and see if there are questions and see if people are willing to give us their view either on the chat or by raising your hand, how many hours you think you do and what kind of percentage of the skills and techniques you've learned have you actually implemented. So very interested to have your views.
I'll just put the questions in the chat box for
Great.
people, just as a reminder.
So I can see people are looking serious and looking like they're calculating things, which is a good sign. So let's have a view. How many hours and how much do you think you actually implement? Can I have some bit of feedback either in the chat or a question or two? So there we've got quite a few new messages, and we've got let me just scroll down. So we've got
30 hours.
Yeah, 30 hours and 80%. That's pretty impressive. If that's what you do, that's an awful lot. That's better than most. In fact, just while I think about it, a fascinating little side story. I had a very small amount of skin cancer that I had removed on my hand. And when I was with the surgeon who was doing the work, he asked me because he wanted to distract me, I'm sure. So just local anaesthetic. He asked me about what I did and so on, and I talked about some of the stuff. And he said to me, "Look, Ian, I totally believe that research." Because I do lots and lots of professional development because it's a requirement of the profession, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the things that I go to are PowerPoint slides. They're and discussions and so on, and they're always really interesting. But actually, I don't really implement anything from it because none of it seems to directly relate. So it's all interesting, but it doesn't kind of relate to the sort of surgery that I end up doing. So it was a fascinating thing. So, just some few other comments. Lots of extensive hours, and it definitely feels like a gap. I guess that means in terms of the gap between learning and implementation. Um, 30 hours
Mm.
plus 1% implementation. Well, there's a delightfully honest view. So lots of hours, 30%. Very interesting. Another one, implementation feels low, 30%. 60 hours of PD fully implemented, about 50%. Okay, more hours of PD than I want to calculate. I love that one. That's lovely. Uh, skills implemented, not so good. 60 hours, 25%, 30 hours, 20%, 80-ish hours, 25. Okay, 30%, 50%. Okay, fantastic. So we've probably got a range, just going to write this down, from about 80 to about 20. And I would guess that the average was probably about something like 35, something like that. And that's kind of typical. That's what happens to a lot of us. And so, what I really thank you very much indeed for that. That's given me a really interesting idea about the audience and what's going on here. It's also fascinating just in terms of much of your experience is kind of the same as mine. Very interesting indeed. So we'll just go back to the slide share, and I will just carry on. So thank you very much for your input in that. That was great. And so I've done a bit of speculating on why we don't seem to improve so much as a result of this. And of course, it's not everybody. There's lots of things you can do. So this is not a pessimistic thing that we should all give up professional development. My first belief, and again, I'm really interested if you've got ideas, put them in the chat or raise your hand. My first belief is that often, and this certainly applies to me, often professional development is kind of a bit random in the sense that what I do in terms of professional development is a little bit of I do my planned and then I can read and so on. But a lot of it is related to what the psychological society or the other professional bodies that you belong to actually have on their topic list for the year. And of course, that's kind of what we're stimulated by, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what we should be, that's what we really need in terms of our client base. So our development is often not focused on implementation. So a lot of the courses we go to, and of course this particular session tonight is as guilty as anybody is. So I'm a complete hypocrite in doing this tonight because, of course, I'm going to try and talk a little bit about implementation, but our primary focus is actually on knowledge sharing tonight. It's not on implementation, and that's the reality of most professional development. And as my surgeon said, a lot of professional development can be tick box unless we're clear about what we want to do. And of course, it's not time for despair. Professional development is great. We can get better. There's an awful lot of research on what we actually need to do to get better. And that's really the bulk of what I want to talk about tonight. Um, So there is something called deliberate practice, and it's been applied in lots and lots of areas. It's been applied in sport, and it's been applied in medicine and nursing and teaching and all sorts of other areas. So this is quite a broadly implemented and broadly researched area. And there are essentially 7 steps that are important if you really want to improve. And some of these sound a little bit like they're motherhood and apple pie. So I'll just give you some examples to kind of clarify. So first of all, you need clear and specific improvement goals. And that sounds like, well, yes, of course, that's what every professional development plan is. But let me just give you an example of what I think is needed, and then we can kind of talk that through. So, for example, I had someone come to me who really wanted to learn about reframing. So I don't know how much you know about reframing, but in many ways, it is the heart of coaching. It is really trying to assist clients to see challenges and difficulties and so on in a fresh light that enables them to let go of a lot of unhelpful negative emotions and to move forward in a way in which they can find meaning. So this person came to me saying, I really want to get better at reframing and I find it really difficult. And so we started by setting some goals. So rather than having a goal of, I want to be better at reframing, we talked about how many sessions she did where she tried reframing, and either it was too early or the reframe wasn't right or the client wasn't ready or whatever. How many times she actually succeeded in the client having a kind of an aha moment. And we decided that was probably about 30%. And so she set a goal of, well, in a year's time, what I'd really like to do is to have a success rate when I use reframing of more like 60%. Okay, so that's a much better example of what we're talking about here, a specific improvement goal. So you get a kind of a feel for what needs to happen. In terms of intentional regular practice, we'll talk some more about this, but it's really the idea that reading a book or going to a course isn't a very good foundation for learning. If you really want to learn it, you have to practice it. You have to do the reflective practice. You have to think about examples, etc., etc. You need clear and effective feedback, and I'll talk about what I've learned in this area, and I've learned a great deal about what works and what my clients think of me. And what I found is that I used to do what probably most people do, where towards an end of a session, I'd say to the client, are we on target or not? And the client would almost always be polite and say, oh, yes, yeah, great, thank you very much. So we talk about how we get actionable feedback, which is really helpful. And then we need to think about actually working with someone else. So what we know about deliberate practice is that if you can work with someone else, an experienced professional, either your supervisor or a coach for yourself, then you do much, much better. The person helps to keep you on track. They support you. They provide you with motivation. They provide you with challenge. And they really enable you to push yourself more than you might if you were just working alone. Point 6 is this idea that if you can actually build a mental image of yourself, and the coach that I worked with, she did really well in this area of just spending a little bit of time just thinking about what would happen if she was a really good if she had really good reframing skills as a coach, and who could she actually work and how could she implement things. So she built up this mental image of what it's like. And she was then able to systematically build on other skills. So we know a lot about what we need to do, and it doesn't look like a PowerPoint slide. And I want to give you just so in the book I talk about two or three examples, but I just want to give you an example of something way out in left field, just to show that deliberate practice has been used in all sorts of areas. So this is an example of the Top Gun school. You probably some of you may have seen the Top Gun movie. Well, it was based on an actual set of circumstances. And the circumstances were that during the Vietnam War, US fighter pilots started off in dogfights with Soviet trained North Vietnamese pilots. And initially, they did extremely well. And their kill rate, I mean, all of this is very grim stuff, but anyway, their kill rate was very high. But over time, it eroded and eroded and eroded. And the Americans became really concerned that they were losing a lot of aircraft and a lot of pilots. And so they decided to set up a school, and it was its formal name wasn't the Top Gun School, but I think the Top Gun School really just came out of the movie. But anyway, their aim was to train fighter pilots very systematically and very carefully in all aspects of fighter weapons system. So they had a very clear goal of what they wanted to do, and they had a group of students who flew fighter jets every day. So they had this incredibly rigorous practice. Every day they were up in the sky fighting, and every day when they came back, they had very regular feedback from the instructors who were highly capable pilots themselves. So the instructors would grill them in terms of, well, what happened and what do you think you did well and what didn't you do so well and what have you learned and et cetera, to the point where these pilots themselves got really good at this self-interrogation process. So they got really good at helping themselves to critique their own work. And once they were in a reasonable shape, they introduced a second team of enemy, in inverted commas, the red team, who were all expert fighters. So now, instead of just practicing the maneuvers and so on, they actually had close to real dogfights with expert fighters. So very intense kind of stuff. And they slowly, through this process of deep involvement and deep questioning, came to see themselves more and more clearly as fighter pilots. And they were trained very systematically, and over time they did extremely well. And that kind of this sort of model of intensive development, which is quite different from, you know, a lecture about weapon systems or whatever. So I give two or three examples, and I just thought that was a very interesting kind of left field example of a real life implementation of this. But of course, you're wondering, I guess, well, what's this got to do with coaches and how do we actually apply it? Which of course is the basis of the book. So one of the things that we know about coaching, and there's lots and lots of research on this, is that the most powerful element of coaching is the quality of the relationship between the coach and the client. And that quality of the relationship, that connection, is far more powerful than any particular technique or approach that you use. So actually, the relationship is important. And what's one of the most important things in the relationship is the degree of emotional connection. And what we know about coaches, and this applies to me as much as anything else. In fact, I'll give you my own examples. Is that some of it, well, all of us are better with some clients than others. It's just kind of we're not the same with everybody. And if we can work out what clients we are not good with, then we can start to do something about this type of client to help us improve. So in my case, I'm not very good with angry clients, and I know where that came from. There was quite a bit of not physical violence, but there was quite a bit of anger and hostility in my with my my older brother and my parents, and I found it very distressing. And so anger is something that I've always been just slightly fearful of. And what I've noticed is that I'm not very good with angry clients. And what I tend to do, now I've really explored it, which is slightly embarrassing to say, is when someone gets angry, I have this kind of silly smile on my face and I tend to half laugh. And of course, that's totally inappropriate. And of course, it detunes my relationship with the client because they interpret my rather foolish non-verbal behaviour as if I'm not interested, which isn't the case. It's just that I'm a bit embarrassed by, I'm a bit uncomfortable. So one of the things you can do as a coach is to think about what kind of clients do you dislike? Where do you struggle to connect? And then you can do something about it. And I see there, sorry, and then I see there are a number of questions and comments in the chat. Let me just have a little look and see if, yes. So Fran says he's read a lot about the Working Alliance and how critical it is. I wonder if there are better relationships through intense training. That's exactly right. That's really what we're going to talk about tonight. So this is also very good comment, a really good opportunity to think about unconscious bias, and of course, exactly right. And I know that I have improved my ability to work with neurodiverse clients, where I think, like many of us, I started feeling kind of uncomfortable with many of those people, and I saw their behaviour as somehow inappropriate or awkward or whatever, where actually it was probably a good slice of it was me, not them. So absolutely, those kind of things are so important. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. So some very good comments about training being knowledge-based, and that's very useful. Okay. So I'll go back to sharing my screen, and please feel free to keep asking questions. That's great. So, how do we learn to stay and tolerate these clients that we don't feel so comfortable with? So there's a lot of really good, interesting books and research in this area. A lot of it has been done with counselors and psychotherapists in this area. And I just want to give you one example that's kind of quirky and interesting, I reckon. So the idea in this particular approach is that if you have trouble with sadness, for example, you go on to the internet and you do a little search for sad movie clips. And you'll find that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of sad movie clips. And you can look through them and you can start to find ones that that kind of resonate or don't resonate, ones you feel a bit uncomfortable with. And you can start by watching a nice, pleasant sort of video or listening to some music or whatever. You can start watching one of these videos. And of course, what you need to do is not start with kind of Schindler's List or something that's horrendous. You need to start with something that's kind of moderately uncomfortable. Being very careful that if you've had past trauma, you don't re-traumatize yourself. You need to do this with someone. You need to have support and so on. But the idea is that if you can slowly expose yourself to a little bit of this discomfort, you can gradually get used to it and you can gradually become more comfortable with it. So that's what I did with anger. So I found some really amazing videos. So there's one of a couple arguing and they're just going hammer and tongs. And I found it really uncomfortable. There's other ones there's a court martial where men are arguing and so on. One of them with Jack Nichols, yes, in it. And was it Nicholson? But anyway, you know the actor. And I just watched them. Every few nights I go and have a little, and I really noticed how over time I got an awful lot better. And I could tolerate them. when I first watched them, I became uncomfortable and I could notice myself getting into this kind of silly, smirky smile. And after I'd done it half a dozen times, I could watch it and I could seriously start to think about, well, what's going on here? And what is it? Why have they got so angry? How are they triggering each other? And so I could ask myself questions, get myself involved, help myself stay engaged with the issues whilst gradually becoming less sensitive myself to the issue. And I found it really enlightening and very helpful to do. Um, Again, just if you're going to try it, just be very careful. Make sure that whatever you choose is not triggering some kind of trauma for you. Be very safe and be prepared if you do feel too uncomfortable to come out of it. And there's lots of these kind of techniques to gradually expose yourself. You can do it in imagination, you can do it in all sorts of ways. And in fact, there's some quite funny ones. I'll just give you a little story. I worked with someone whose real problem was with people who are boring, people who just wanted to vent. And he basically said, these people drive me nuts. Here I am, highly trained, willing to help. And all they want to do is yabber on and on and on about how their problems are caused by someone else. And so I said to him, well, what I'd like you to do is to go on to the internet and just find something really boring to watch. Well, he found a beauty. There is a wonderful video of a tap dripping. Okay, now you wouldn't believe this, but he decided that what he was going to do is every third night or whatever, he was going to watch this video. It was about 10 minutes or something. It was quite a long video for what it was. And all it is a tap dripping. And what he did in that was he trained himself to think about, well, instead of just switching off and saying this is boring and stupid, he trained himself to start thinking about, well, what color is the tap? Is that a brass tap or is that, and what about the tiles behind and how fast is it dripping and is the drips changing and so on. So he really learned to engage in something that he had previously found incredibly boring. So there's all sorts of wonderful things you can do to help yourself stay better engaged. And most of us have particular clients who, for better or worse, we're not so good at, and understanding that and doing something about it is a really good step in helping you improve. So the second issue I want to talk about is skill building, and I'll just continue to talk about this person who came to me who wanted to develop in reframing. So the thing about skill building is that you can read a book and you can understand the ideas, but actually to be really good as a coach, you need to be able to tap into those skills instantly. And the challenge with reframing, of course, is that it's a very challenging skill and it's quite hard to tap into instantly. And so to really improve in this, you need to very carefully identify the skill and you need to break it down into micro skills. So I've given the example there of empathetic confrontation, which is a really important coaching skill. And obviously it's got two parts. It's about empathy building and it's about challenge. So you can break empathy building into, well, it's about looking at the other person and it's about seeming interested, it's about paraphrasing to demonstrate you understand, etc., etc. So you can develop the list of micro skills in this area, and then you can develop a list of kind of client statements. Okay, so what would be an empathetic confrontation to a client who's very sad, or to a client that's very angry, or to a client that's this, or to a client that's that, or to a client that's something else? So you start with the help of a coach or supervisor to really repeat practice at a micro skill level until you really understand the skill, until you've overlearned it, because it's this overlearning that enables us to instantly apply our skills in the coaching session. So, so very important. So I just see there are 7 comments in the chat. So I'll just go back and we'll just have a little look at those. Yeah, so Fran says the shiny object syndrome. There's a flood of options and a tendency to migrate to the newest fad, and that's exactly right. And we see that so much. And of course, I'm as guilty as anybody in promoting the latest fad tonight. So I'm guilty as charged. So lots of agreement. Um, so, okay, let me just see some of the others. Yeah, so the first time I've heard of A Few Good Men used as a training video, and thank you very much. That is the name of the Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise argument, and it's a delightfully ferocious argument, isn't it? I mean, for those of you who've seen it, it's amazing. So someone else saying they've heard similar research about watching horror movies to help you train your nervous system and recalibrate it after shock, and I'm sure that's right. Again, with this very strong caution about the need to be careful and to make sure this is a safe and kind of caring approach. So what motivated the tap to drip? I love that. That's wonderful. Yes, well, the person might have spent a bit of time thinking about what motivated the tap to drip. Interesting proposition, training oneself to be comfortable with something you don't like, being very curious about why you're being triggered in the first place. So yes, I'm not saying this is the only way you can do it. And actually understanding why you're like this and what triggered it is a perfectly legitimate approach to dealing with that. So it is, you know, this is just one kind of technique. And other people talking about mindfulness. So all of those things are great ways to address the same kind of problem. So let's go back. My slides keep slipping. Share. Oops. Share. PowerPoint. Share. So. So then the other issue, the next issue, so there's a whole lot of things that we can do to help. So you can see getting ourselves to a point where we are emotionally attuned and can stay tuned is important. Breaking skills down to micro skills and practicing them and overlearning them is important. So is getting deliberate feedback. So as I said before, I've always asked my clients if we were on target and so on, and everybody is totally polite. And in many ways, that kind of feedback never helped me at all to get better. And so I decided to do a bit of research and a bit of thinking. And I decided, and this is at this stage, there's no research on this, but it's something I'm working on. I decided that if I wanted actionable feedback, then there were 3 things I needed to assess. I needed to assess the quality of the working relationship I had with the client. In other words, I needed the client to rate me. So what am I like as a coach? And obviously there's bias in doing that, and I accept all of that, but at least I wanted the feedback. Secondly, I wanted the client to assess how much progress they were actually making in the coaching, and I wanted them to do that. And I asked them politely if they'd be prepared to do that a number of times. And I also wanted them to, using an open question, to give me feedback about what I could do better. So I'm just going to walk you through the questionnaires, and then I'm going to tell you about what I learned from the experience. So for those of you with a psychotherapeutic background, you'll recognize something called the session rating scale. It's a psychometrically reliable and valid measure. It's been used in psychometrics for years and years and years, and it contains a number of items, just a very small number of items, very clearly worded, really nice scale for its simplicity. And basically I've developed a version of that, which is really for coaching. So what it asks is, did the coach actually listen attentively, understand, and show me respect? Did the coach focus on what I wanted to in terms of the session? Did the the coach's approach meet my needs? And overall, was the session effective for me? And we know that those are the kind of questions that effectively drill in and give us feedback about the quality of the relationship. So again, we're kind of standing on the shoulders of the giants in psychotherapy, and we're hoping that this translates to coaching. My guess is it probably does. So the second question really relates to feedback and progress, and so asks people about where they're at in terms of their well-being. So general well-being, social well-being, vocational well-being, and overall well-being. So we're asking them questions a number of times over the course of our coaching as to where they are, and we're looking to see if there is improvement. And we're asking them also what is the level of progress they think they're making. Now, what I found was when I used this, in other words, when I drilled into the detail of this with my clients, rather than asking my usual brand and rather hopeless question, I actually got some really interesting feedback. But the most interesting feedback came from the question, what are your suggestions on how the coach could help you more to improve the coaching process? So what could I as a coach do better? And what I found after doing this for about maybe 6 months with a lot of clients is the clients almost universally said, the coaching relationship is great. I like working with you. It is about my agenda and not yours. People generally made good progress, some a lot faster than others, some very slowly, but people made progress. But on this area, what I found was people said to me, Ian, you're a good coach. Ian, I'm making progress. But the problem I have, Ian, is that at the end of the coaching session, I'm fired up. I've got an action plan. I know what I'm going to do. But then I go back to work and there's a flood of emails and people are interrupting me all the time. And it kind of goes out of my head. And what I really need from you is some kind of prompt or reminder or something to kind of get me back into this is what we agreed. And I talked it over with a number of clients, and what a number of clients said is if you could produce me a one-page graphic of, for example, how to deal with staff members who are continually complaining, or how to deal with my boss who's super critical of me or micromanaging or something. If you could produce me a one-pager of this and send it to me a week later, that would be fantastic. That would make all the difference. So I've learned lots and lots and lots, and I hope that I've improved lots by getting what I consider to be actionable feedback. So you can see that in this kind of regard, I've worked quite hard to find things that I can actually implement rather than my kind of bland question of are we on track? So there's a whole lot of other things, and I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but you can learn not only how to use skills and break them down into micro skills, you can learn about what the right skills are at the right time. So I've got this little 5-0 model. So what skills to use at the opening session, the opening phase of your coaching session, the objective setting phase, the operational grappling with the options and so on, and then the outcome where you're agreeing the homework and the action plan, and then what are the skills that should be ongoing. So you can see if you've got this conceptual model of coaching, you can start to say, okay, well, I think my openings are pretty good, but actually what happens is I get involved in the fascination of the story the client is telling me, and I forget to ask them about what we're trying to achieve in the session. And so we have a really interesting discussion, but I'm not sure we make as much progress as we could. So you can learn that. And so what I've found is that although deliberate practice requires time and effort, and although the process of actually overlearning skills is in some ways a bit of a pain, because you need a lot of practice to overlearn it so it's kind of automatic, For me, it's delivered real benefits. And I started using running training courses and so on in this area. And it does seem to have quite good benefits for people. So in the book, I've got a little detailed working plan of if you want to get into this area, here's a little, over X weeks, this is what you can do. This is the actions, this is the homework, etc. So you can kind of work through it in a systematic way. Because of course, I don't want people just to read at the book and say, gee, that was a neat book, and find the next one on their list. I want them to see if they can really implement some of this. And so I've got a little, we can have a little break now. What I've got is just something for you to think about. So if you were to look at yourself critically as a coach, what kind of skills or approach do you think you really need to fully implement it? So is it reframing, or is it dealing with a particular type of client? What is it you'd really like to be a lot better in? And then a bit of a discussion around, is there anything that might just be useful in this session? So let's go to the chat. We've got a few new messages. The Hawaii 5-0 action plan. I love it. Thanks, Fran. Do you have an example of a one-page graphic you can provide as a reminder? Sure, I will send. I'll send tonight. I'll send a couple of those over. But what I tend to do, just to give you a feel for it, in fact, if any of you are on LinkedIn, there's an amazing woman in the UK called Dr. Hayley. I'll think of a name in a minute, but she's got dozens of these that she posts on LinkedIn. If anybody can remember Hayley's name, that would be great. But she's got lots and lots of them, and she's very happy to share them. But what I tend to do is I just make a little PowerPoint slide of something, just 3 or 4 steps. And just send that to produce it as a PDF or something. But I'm very happy to share a little example or two for you. Hi, Ian. I'm curious whether you cover supervision as a key strategy for coach continuous improvement in your book. And no, I don't. But that would make a wonderful chapter. And you can see how this kind of approach could easily be built into supervision. And I don't know, supervision is not an area, although I supervise a number of people, it's not an area I've really read the research, but I would be fascinated to see what the research says in terms of how much improvement supervision makes in terms of client outcome. And I don't know the answer. Being more intentional about how and when you apply the learnings after each CPD session rather than just hoping to implement it organically. I think that's exactly right. I think that's precise. And Hayley Lewis, that's God bless you. So Hayley Lewis is the woman who's on LinkedIn. And she's got lots and lots of these. She's well worth following. I think she's got 24,000 followers or something deeply impressive on LinkedIn. And just to go back to the previous point, this whole idea of reflecting on what we learned, thinking about how we can actually implement it, not just going to our supervisor or our coach with, well, I've got this problem client, can we talk it through? But saying, I'd really like some help in getting better at this particular skill or with this particular group of clients, and so deliberately working on that. I'm curious about how you administer the survey. So yes, so I do it in the session, pencil and paper. I find that's by far the best because the client will give it back to me and I can collect it there and then and put it aside. And I never look at it in front of them because I kind of feel like that might be, I want them to be as honest as they can. And of course, I really kind of emphasize the point that in this, I really want them to be critical. If they just say I'm a good guy, I'm not going to learn anything. I really need to know, well, Ian, you should be doing more of this. And it's funny because the other thing is, which I've really learned, is I can be too much of a Mr. Nice Guy, and you probably see that in me. I'm kind of chirpy and happy and da 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 da. And actually, it's not what some clients want. And so clients are kind of saying to me, "You need to push me harder. You need to da da da." Da." So I've learned lots and lots. Very, very, very helpful. Um, so someone says in their weekly reflection, I question myself on new learnings, and that's exactly the kind of idea we're talking about. What are the specific metrics you use to assess therapeutic effectiveness? Um, actually, I've read most of the studies I've done have been meta-analyses or really large scale studies. I've never really looked into the specific metrics of therapeutic effectiveness, but I assume from what I've read that they are largely not client satisfaction, client improvement measures. So they're really measures like that second group that I showed you, where they're measures of not just is the relationship good, but am I making progress? I kind of assume that's that's the level of things. I find having a superhero coaching, so I just can't quite read it. There's a little something in the way. Can you read it? Anybody else read it? What is it? What is that
Yes,
one?
yeah. So
Oh,
Emily's
thank you.
just sharing having a coaching pal
Right.
really helps
Ah, okay. Yes, I can see
cement
it now. Yes.
development.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
bouncing
yeah,
off
I agree.
advice.
I use peer supervision and I find it incredibly helpful. And it's really nice just to be able to talk kind of honestly. Um, so what if you were doing a session online? Do you administer the survey? Then yes, you could. You could just email it to the person beforehand. And then some other ones, the people talking about Adam Grant, who's a pretty extraordinary kind of guy, recently said it's better to ask for advice than feedback. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's exactly the point. Yes, I think that's a wonderful point that Olivia has made. That um, just asking for feedback, it's not specific enough for the person to be really able to give you good ideas. And someone else brings up Marshall Goldsmith. Anyway, Marshall's a feed forward concept, and that's exactly like this. So it's the idea of don't ask about what happened, ask for suggestions of what might be useful in the future. So all of those are really great kind of things that can help us in this regard. And again, I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to go through some kind of comprehensive deep immersion in this. I think that what we all need to do is just chip away and think about what are the areas that we really could improve in. And rather than moving on to the next shiny thing, what is it that we could really get into? What can we just say we need to be able to do better? So Fran's got to go. Thank you very much, Fran. Much appreciated. Very nice to see you. So Fran's someone who I connected with a lot on LinkedIn, and it's very nice to see the person themselves. So I just wonder about thoughts about anybody want to share an area that they think they could do with, or a type of client that they are not so good at, and any ideas in this that could be very helpful. There's a lovely comment here from Heather about vertical development, and I think that's exactly right. We're talking about how you can put together a number of these different kind of concepts to really improve your own coaching ability. And obviously you can do an awful lot yourself, but the the research does tend to show that you're better off if you do this with a coach or a supervisor or someone like that. Um, so that seems to be the comments for the moment. Just got a few other slides, so just to go back to that. So I do run a course in this, a 75-hour, 12-month program, which you can do, and basically it just walks you through this with the idea of not providing knowledge, but helping you to implement it. I only take 4 or 5 people each course, so it's very personal, very implementation kind of focused. Um, and that's the book if you're interested. So that's really the what I wanted to share with you. And I'm just interested if there are any other questions or anything else that people would like to comment on or ask about. So I see there are a few more. What approach, skills, or techniques have you learned that you want? I just can't. Oh, there we are. That
So
you
I just
fully.
shared
Yeah.
those
Okay.
prompting
Yes.
questions that
Oh,
you
thank
had
you.
on the slide, Ian, for
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
to
Okay.
reflect
Thank you.
on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yes. Okay. How do you desensitize getting frustrated with someone who is overly negative, powerless, playing the victim? Okay, so that's a great question. So I bet if you go on to the internet and you search for um, overly negative film clip, someone complaining, you will find an awful lot of little snippets of people who are being very negative. Again, you want to be very careful you don't get into watching something that's traumatic or triggering, but you'll find I've never watched a lot of YouTube, but I got interested in it because of this work and because of some of the other books I've read that recommend this approach, which is primarily for the other books have been written for psychotherapists. So I was interested in writing this for coaches, but um, just finding something on that where the person is being negative and just watching it for a little while and then maybe stopping it and just thinking, what do I feel inside? What's going on for me? Am I getting impatient here? Or am I cutting myself off because I find the negativity and the powerlessness so difficult to listen to? Um, Very much that kind of thing. And as someone suggested before, you can go and do some thinking and talking about, well, where did this come from and what does it mean? But you can also just watch it and get used to doing it and see how far you can get through and most of these clips are only 2 or 3 minutes. They're just little snippets. I guess there's copyright problems if you're taping big slices of movies and things. So just they're just snippets. So can you watch a whole snippet and just feel like you can get through it and listen to this person? Maybe what you're doing is thinking about, well, what kind of language is this person using? What's happening with their nonverbal? If I was to stop now and think about what I would say to them now, what would I say? How could I paraphrase what I've heard? All of those kind of questions are really, really important in terms of getting used to and feeling like you're able to sit there through this. Because, there's an old coaching saying that there's no point in saying anything until the client is willing to listen. So we need to be good at listening, at just kind of getting through it, and listening to them, remaining connected. Because if we try to say something too soon, we'll either get pushback or get resistance, or the person will just ignore it and carry on, or we won't be able to, continue our relationship. So, very, very, very good question. And that's exactly the sort of thing that we would do in the course. So what are your thoughts on journaling? Look, I'm a fantastic fan of journaling. I don't do it on a regular basis, but I do find it incredibly helpful. In fact, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Reflected Practice for Coaches, which is there's a whole lot of material on different techniques. And one of the things that is really good in journaling is so I think it's called the 6 minute write. So you set an alarm for 6 minutes, you just write and write and write for 6 minutes. You don't worry about grammar, you don't do anything, you just write. And then you have a chance to read and reflect. And as you read and reflect, you maybe just circle 2 or 3 insights that you gained so you can kind of use that journaling not just to vent, which it's fantastic for, and sometimes that's enough for people, but you can also use it to sort of to gain insights. So I think journaling is great, both for us as coaches as well as for our clients. And I've been really surprised with some clients just how journaling alone can enable them to let go of painful emotions and difficult situations and so on. Oh, yes. So, or can we have another very good point from Jackie? Can we just have a list of coaches where we refer clients where we don't feel aligned with them? And of course, that's the other option is, of course, yes, no one's forcing you to work with this kind of client. And of course, if your reaction is very strong, and I know, I don't know how many of you have read the ICF guide for referring on. It's downloadable if you go onto their website, but they have a fantastic guide for when to hand on to clients and what it is that you should be looking for, etc. And I totally agree with this. I think all coaches should have a psychotherapist or a counselor or a clinical psych or someone that they actually know reasonably well. So I often suggest to my people I supervise, they find someone, a therapist like that, and they go out and have a coffee with them and get to know them. So if they do have to refer someone on, it's not just I could have a look in the register and see who's around. It's actually, I know this person and I can recommend them, etc., etc. So I think it's really good to have some ideas about who's out there and who you can refer on to. And obviously, therapists, counselors, clinical psychologists, etc., are all very important. It's good to have the importance of reflective practice reinforced. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's such a wonderful skill for coaches, and I find it so helpful just to. I find it really useful for my writing to write for a while, and then just to go put it aside for a few weeks, go back and say, who's my audience? And if I was in that audience, would this really satisfy me? Or have I just started writing here and I've just kind of got writer's blurb and I'm carrying on and on page after page? And in reflective practice, I did that quite a lot. And I actually ended up rewriting maybe 2/3 of the book. What I decided was that I'd written how to combine reflective practice with a number of therapeutic approaches like ACT and so on. And I went back and I thought, I think this is just kind of ordinary. What I need to do is I need to go into Google search and find the very latest developments in this. So my chapter on using reflective practice with ACT isn't that. It's about using reflective practice with internet supplemented ACT, which is a kind of a whole new area where there are lots of good online programs from Russ Harris and so on, lots of really neat stuff that you can use in conjunction with your coaching. And there's some quite interesting research about the value of that. So some very nice comments about good insights into honing my practice. People who have to leave, that's all entirely understandable. Okay, so that looks like the end of our chats at the moment. I don't know whether anybody has got a topic that they want to raise or some comments or whether we're going to have some more questions in chat, but I'm here and my time is yours. And if there is anything, I'd be delighted to hear from you.
We'll open the floor up to questions.
Ian, I
Lydia.
was curious. Yes, thanks,
Hi.
Celeste, and thanks, Ian, very much for tonight.
Good.
Given you've written on reflective practice for coaches and now the 6 effective steps for coach effective practice, I guess I was
Yes.
curious as to what's next. What is the book? the book that, or the concept that you feel that would be of real value for coaches, do you think?
So I'm in the process of thinking about a number of books. But one book that I wrote recently that came out at a similar time to Coaching Expertise is actually a book called Schema Coaching. So what it does is it looks at schema therapy, which is a really well-developed, comprehensive, very well-researched approach to assisting clients with deep-seated difficulties. And I went and did some training in that area. I found a supervisor. I did some personal therapy in that area. And then I wrote a book about using these kinds of things. But one of the things that really struck me is that in schema therapy and in the whole schema writing area, most of the writing is about what are called early maladaptive schemas. And I have started to become interested of late in the positive schemas. So there's a few writers who've started a little bit of psychometrics around positive schemas. But actually, a book I'd really like to write, I've actually got a contract to write something else, so I'm going to be a little bit distracted from this idea, but this is kind of my current top of mind. I'd really like to write a book that would be called Positive Schema Coaching, which really integrated positive psychology with the schema approach, where we used PERMA and all of those wonderful concepts out of positive psychology, but we used them to really deal with some deep-seated difficulties. And the reason why I like it, and the reason why I love your question, is that actually we as coaches, we much prefer to look at the positive. We're about future, we're about solutions, we're about building self-confidence and self-efficacy and so on. And although we get people who have problems and traumas and difficulties and so on, and as long as the people are within the coaching population and not the clinical population, then, you know, we can usefully contribute something to them. But actually, I think applying the schema mentality to positive psychology is something I've become very interested in. So I hope one day to write a book on that. Wonderful question. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Karen's asked an interesting question, Ian. Where do I start with building a reflective practice?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. If you want a place to start, what I would say is you should start by maybe at the end of every second day, something like that, maybe at the end of every week, just spending 10 minutes or so thinking and writing about who have I seen this week. So go back, look at your calendar. Well, I've seen Bill and I've seen Mary and I've seen Jane and da 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 da. What did I do? And then think about what went well and what didn't go so well. And then from out of that, well, what did I learn out of this? What are the areas that I need to improve in, or what are the strengths that I can build on? So think about what are the insights I've gained, and then develop yourself a little action plan, and then come back a week later or a few days later and start to think about it in a way so that you're really building on your skills. And what a lot of the people that I supervise do is if they commute, and it's by train or bus or something or other like that, they use that sort of time. So reflective practice can really be done very efficiently if you can find some kind of down-wasted time in inverted commas, you know, rather than death scrolling on your phone. Do a bit of reflective practice. That sort of thing is for me is the way to start. Okay, and is developing positive schemas the ideal outcome or intent of coaching, or are we actually doing that as a community of coaches? What does it take to build positive schemas? Well, yes, that's a great question, Jackie. And of course, I haven't thought all of those. This is kind of an idea that's starting to ferment. But yes, totally. We as a community of coaches are really trying to build up these positive schemas. So the positive schemas that have been identified are things like emotional fulfillment, They're about a sense of success. They're about those kinds of things. So yes, absolutely, that's what we're about doing. There are some really useful techniques, imagery techniques, for example, in schema that I think could usefully be applied to this. So I think that um, I don't want to go into this too much, but let me give you the kind of 30-second summary. The idea of schema is really that if you can have a common language with the person that you're working with in terms of the description of what their challenge is, then you can start to apply in an integrated way some CBT techniques, some psychodynamic techniques, some Gestalt techniques, etc., etc. So you can have an integrated approach to using a range of different techniques. That's not an eclectic approach. In an eclectic approach, we tend to just jump between approaches which we think are good ideas. This is a systematic, integrated approach, which is really useful in helping us to be able to work systematically with our clients, but also to explain why it is that we're now moving from this technique to that technique. So a wonderful question from Stephen. What am I reading at the moment? So what I'm reading is Irwin Yalom. I don't know whether you know Irwin Yalom. He's a US psychiatrist. He's written dozens of books. And I'm reading a book of his, well, two books of his. One, a very thick tome called Existential Psychotherapy, which is a really interesting, and that's something else I'm interested in writing in. But also I'm reading one of his novels that is called Lying on the Couch. And it's a series of case studies about the most extraordinary clients you have ever read about. He's an amazing writer. Some of it I think finds a little bit far-fetched, but yeah, well, can you recommend Love's Executioners? Yes, so that's another one of Yalom's book. I think that, so it's a series of little case studies, and it's called Love's Executioner because one of the clients that he worked with was someone, and if I remember the story correctly, someone who asked him to store a whole lot of love letters that were written by the client for someone else other than this person's wife. And I can't remember now whether it was a lover or whatever, but anyway, it was some deeply complicated psychological, and it's got a whole lot of these extraordinary stories. And I think he's such an amazing writer. Some of it's, as I say, some of it's a bit far-fetched, but it's still fascinating stuff and very entertaining. Thank you.
I wonder if our group, if anyone's willing to take themselves off a microphone and ask a question to you, Ian. You've been really fantastic at scanning the chat and answering all the questions to date.
Good, and
Just
lots
while
of
we have
lovely
you
comments. Thank you very much. So really appreciate how generous you've been with your time, and thank you very much. And look, it's just been great, but I've got a little bit more time if anybody has got something that they want to talk about. And I'd strongly encourage you to at least pick up a few threads of this and to, in fact, if you want to kind of a finish on a bit of practical advice, my practical advice is don't read as much. Read half as much as what you're doing and spend the other half of the time that you'd be doing reading really getting into the books. So only read the best, and if you get halfway through it and it's no good, throw it away, get something else. Get something that's really good and spend a whole lot of time thinking about actually how could I implement this, or if this is ACT, maybe I should go and find an ACT therapist and do some ACT therapy myself, or etc., etc. So I think we try to do too much, and if we could get into more depth in a lot of the thinking and reading and so on that we do, I think that we would that we would be in much better shape. And um, Celeste and I were just talking about before we opened things up about just most of us have a dozen books sitting by the bed that we're reading. You know, that really isn't very helpful because what we do is we finish one and then we think we've achieved something, which we have, of course, but have we really implemented it? And, I think that this idea of just thinking through what it is we can really do to have an impact and get more feedback and make ourselves more attuned, etc., is so important to us going forward.
Ian, that
Stephen,
just reminds me, sorry, Celeste.
Please go ahead, Olivia.
That just reminds me of back in learning and development days, the
Yes,
70-20-10 model, of course,
yes,
10% being
yes,
classroom training, 20% being coaching, mentoring, and this
yes,
whole 70% being the on-the-job deliberate practice, as you call it. And
yes,
the fact that we've got
yes,
an opportunity to mine that for a lot more than we probably do, and to experiment with different strategies and techniques that we've
yeah,
learned,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
test those with our supervisors, etc. So thank you. I think that's
yeah,
fantastic advice: to read less,
yeah, yeah.
implement more. Thank you.
And that's a lovely example. I remember that from my L&D days too, and but I'd forgotten it. So it's a very nice reminder. And yeah, it's that experience that is so important. So I run quite a lot of training courses, but I never had more than 4 or 5 people in the course. And of course, it's not very commercially attractive to having 200 or something or other. I really admire people who make a lot of money from it, but I really like the idea that if there's a small number of people, you can have a really good impact, and people can, you can actually practice things together, and you can get some feedback from me and from other people. You can think about what it's like to be in the client's shoes. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do that's really highly engaging. And I think if you're running courses, I think really trying to incorporate some of that is a fantastic idea.
Stephen,
Ian, yeah, I've got a particular micro skill that I'd like to improve. Can I just share that and then
Oh,
potentially
absolutely.
use? Yep. So, when I'm asking questions, obviously my questions of the client is to increase their awareness. And
Yes.
sometimes I buy in too much into the detail and get really interested in that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'd like to, because it's not for me. And
Yes.
sometimes my habit is to get lost in that detail, etc. I want to improve my ability to be focused more on the client and not so much focused on the detail,
Yes.
to help them increase their awareness. So I'm not quite sure of the skill I need to be, the micro skill that I need to develop, and how I might go about that.
Yeah, so I guess the my guess would be that the micro skill is something about questioning for insight.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I would do is I would think about finding something online, a video online of someone telling a really interesting story, and just using that video and stopping it every 10 seconds and saying, what did the person just say? And what would be an insight generating question that I could ask at this point? Now, you'll find it's very challenging to do, and it's quite stark in doing it, at least in my experience, because you start to realize this is very difficult. Wow, what am I going to say now? And but of course, you're doing it privately, and it doesn't matter. And a bit of a long pause is perfectly fine before you restart the video. But something like that would be really useful, Stephen, because you can see just you need to overlearn the skill so that your insightful questions can be kind of turned on at the drop of a hat.
Mm.
That takes overlearning. So you've got to just practice something like that. And the other thing I've suggested to some of my clients who wanted to get into this is go to a cafe. Lots of cafes have tables very close to each other. order yourself a coffee, look at your phone, but actually listen to the conversations around you and see if you, so, okay, well, this man has just said X. What's the insight question I could ask him? So start to practice using everyday conversations so that you're really triggering this kind of thing. And then, of course, try it in a few sessions and then ask people for feedback in terms of, was that really useful, and could I, how could I do it better? And did the question cause you to think, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that's a useful example. It's a fantastic question.
Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Good.
I've been reflecting on the challenge of getting real feedback from clients.
Right.
Going
Yes.
back
Yes.
to something you said earlier, and the sense that sometimes you're in a bit of an echo chamber.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? Two things: getting feedback in session, so maybe at the end of the session, but in real time.
Yep.
As opposed to maybe seeking feedback after a session when they've got time to reflect and maybe give you something a bit more honest.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. I work mostly with executives who are very time poor. So my chance of getting anything out of them if they've left the room is almost zero. They've got people, rah, rah, rah. So I find the only way in which I can collect it, and I accept totally that it's biased, is if I'm sitting there waiting for them to fill out the form to hand it back. Now, most of the people I work with are very emotionally robust, and they'd tell me to their face, no, that was useless. I'm going to find another coach, if that's what they really felt. So I feel like I get quite good feedback from them, but of course I accept I'm totally biased, and but of course they tend to come back and back. So I kind of feel like I've tried to do things afterwards, but I just find the success rate of it is very poor. So I just accept the bias of this is probably all going to be too positive, and I probably need to take some of it with some of their compliments with a pinch of salt. But on the other hand, if they're coming back, I must be all right. And if they've got some suggestions, all the better.
Yeah, I think that's trusting that some of the things that they're giving you, has truth in it. And
Yes.
I like what you said about just accepting the inherent biases in the process. Yeah, thank you.
I see Olivia's got a great question. With client permission, Stephen, you could record the session and take it to your supervisor and then pause it in that. And actually, that's a fantastic suggestion. That's one of the suggestions, for example, that is in my book, and lots of other people have read about it. And it is fantastic. The only disadvantage of it is, I don't know how many of your own sessions you've recorded and listened back, but they are deeply boring to listen to, and it takes an awful long time to listen to them. And if your supervisor is patient enough to listen, then that's great. But it's a fantastic thing to do, and if you can do it, absolutely support it 100%. Just recognize it's got its own kind of set of challenges.
Well, we have 4 minutes to go. So if anyone has a burning question or reflection for Ian, speak now or forever hold your peace, as they say in the classics.
That's it.
I think everyone must be fully satisfied, Ian.
Yeah. So someone just said, play your session back at double speed. I think that's a lovely idea. Yes. And some nice feedback. Thank you very much.
Well, I might take this opportunity. Oh, Stephen's got a hand up. No, other question?
No.
No. Okay. I'll take this opportunity to share my heartfelt thanks to you, Ian, for your generosity and also your own vulnerability in sharing, particularly in the early part of our session, around what made you uncomfortable and some of the the work that you've done on sort of digging deeper, and it goes to show that, you know, it is a lifelong journey, this practice that we have and this development that we have. So if everybody's comfortable either with a virtual round of applause or a, you know, taking your mic off and an actual round of applause for Ian, I invite you to show your appreciation for tonight's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here, and thank you for all of your questions. For an hour and a half, I think we've entertained ourselves thoroughly. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone. Go well into the rest of your week.
Yeah, and I'll email out some examples of those one pages. I do it right now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Night.